You know that feeling when you finish a project early, and instead of getting a moment to breathe, you get another project? Because you're reliable, because you deliver, because everyone knows that if something needs to get done, you're the person to give it to. And somewhere along the way, being good at your job stopped feeling like an asset and started feeling like a trap. The people who miss deadlines don't get the extra work. The people who push back, who say they're too busy, who let things drop, they don't get the extra work either. You do. Because you said yes last time. Because you came through. Because the path of least resistance for everyone around you runs directly through you. That's not a compliment. That's a structural problem that found a person it could rely on. Here's what nobody tells you about people who consistently deliver at work. They call you a high performer. You're actually the most exploited person on the team. Not because anyone decided to exploit you, but because the system optimizes for whoever absorbs the most without breaking. The go-to person label sounds like recognition. What it actually means is that your capacity has been identified, your willingness has been confirmed, and the path of least resistance now has your name on it permanently. You're not being rewarded for being good. You're being used for it. And the difference between those two things is the difference between a career and a sentence. Here's the thing. There's a name for what's happening to you. The competence penalty. The pattern where the most reliable employees receive disproportionately more work, more responsibility, and more complex problems than their peers, without proportional increases in compensation, recognition, or support. It is the organizational equivalent of punishing reliability, and it is almost universal. The mechanism is straightforward once you see it. Managers distribute work along the path of least resistance. The person who delivers gets the next deliverable. The person who pushes back gets fewer requests. The person who misses deadlines stops being considered for the high-stakes work, which sounds like a loss, but functions in practice as protection. And the person who keeps saying yes, keeps delivering, keeps absorbing, that person's capacity expands in everyone's mental model until it becomes limitless. Until the expectation of delivery is so deeply set that failure to deliver feels like a personal aberration rather than evidence that the load was simply too heavy. You didn't end up here because you're weak. You ended up here because you were too good for too long in an environment that had no mechanism for converting that into anything other than more. But then there's something else happening here. Underneath the workload problem is a second layer that rarely gets named. The competence penalty doesn't just affect what you're asked to do. It affects how you're perceived when you finally can't do it. Because when you've been the reliable one, the one who always comes through, always delivers, always absorbs, the day something slips, the standard you're held to is not the team standard. It's your standard, the one you set by being consistently excellent. The mediocre performer who misses a deadline gets a conversation. The high performer who misses a deadline for the first time in 3 years gets a file note. Because their failure is a surprise. Because the expectation had calcified into assumption. Because somewhere along the way, your reliability stopped being something you did and became something you were. And something you were can't take a day off, can't be overwhelmed, can't have limits. Have you ever worked harder than everyone around you and felt somehow more precarious? That's not paranoia. That's the competence penalty doing its second shift. Now here's where it gets interesting. The competence penalty is not just an individual experience. It's a symptom of a specific kind of organizational failure. The failure to build systems that distribute work equitably, develop capability broadly, and recognize contribution explicitly. In organizations that lack these systems, work flows to whoever absorbs it most readily. High performers absorb it. low performers don't. And over time, the gap between what each group is asked to carry widens, until the high performers are functionally doing the work of 2 or 3 people while being paid for 1. Researchers at Harvard Business School studying task allocation in teams found that managers consistently underestimate how unevenly work is distributed and overestimate how much the high performers enjoy the additional responsibility. The assumption is that high performers want more work because they're ambitious, because they find it stimulating, because it's an opportunity. What the research actually shows is that most high performers want recognition, development, and fair compensation, not more tasks that someone else declined to do. The extra work is not a reward. It is a consequence of being too good to ignore and too accommodating to push back. But let's clear something up. The standard advice for this situation is to learn to say no. Set boundaries, protect your capacity, communicate your workload. And that advice is not wrong, but it places the entire burden of a structural problem on the individual who is already carrying the most. It says the system is broken, and your job is to fix your relationship with it through better personal management. What it doesn't say is that an organization where the best workers get the most punished is not a management style problem or a communication problem. It is a design problem. Organizations that want to retain high performers need to build systems that convert excellent performance into something other than additional work, that recognize contribution explicitly rather than implicitly rewarding it with more contribution, that make saying yes sustainable rather than slowly punishing. None of that happens because individuals get better at boundaries. It happens when the system gets redesigned, and the system will not redesign itself. Here's what they don't tell you. The workload you're carrying right now, the projects, the requests, the things that somehow always end up on your plate, that is not a measure of your importance. It is a measure of your tolerance. And those are very different things. Importance would show up in your compensation, in your development, in the explicit recognition that what you carry is extraordinary and should be treated as such. Tolerance shows up in more requests, more deadlines, more, "Can you just take a look at this?" from people who already know you will. So the next time something lands on your plate because you're the reliable one, the capable one, the person everyone knows will come through, notice what it costs. Not to feel guilty about it, not to become someone who stops delivering, but because what gets measured gets managed. And if you never measure the cost of being excellent, the system never has to. The penalty for being good is only permanent if nobody names it. You just did. Now, tell me, are you team, "I've stopped going above and beyond because it only ever led to more work"? Or team, "I still do it, but I'm starting to understand why I shouldn't"? Drop it in the comments. And if this video names something that's been happening to you for years, hit subscribe. We're here every week breaking down the psychology of work that nobody talks about. Because understanding why you are the way you are, that's not just interesting, that's powerful.